Hello, and thanks for joining once again as I dive deeper into the world of Azure Synapse Analytics. And spoiler warning, we're going to talk about SQL pools, and therefore I'm going to call it Azure SQL Data Warehouse accidentally all the way through this video. So SQL pools is our MPP style thing. That's when we're trying to say, I want lots and lots of big chunky SQL servers to query massive amounts of data in parallel. Now, it's less of the exciting new weird stuff in Azure Synapse Analytics because it's already there, it's already live. So if you go to the Azure portal currently and you go and look for Azure Synapse Analytics, this is what you'll see. This is the product that's currently live, except we're going to look at it as part of the wider workspace. What does it look like when we can do things like Spark and SQL on demand and orchestration, and we have these things called Provisioned SQL Pools, which provide the same functionality that the existing product does? Does it work well? Can you use it through the workspace? How do the queries work between on-demand and SQL Data Warehouse? Provisioned SQL Pools, sorry. So don't forget to like and subscribe if you like the video, but otherwise, let's just see what works, right? Okay. So I've got my Synapse Studio here, and I'm going to provision something from scratch. So we'll do that first, and then we'll take a step back and talk a bit about what it is and how it works. So let's go in here. I can go down to my Manage area. So I've got that sitting there. Let's manage. And then I've got SQL pools and Spark pools. So we're doing a new SQL pool. So I've already got on demand. That's created by default. So I'm going to say I want a new SQL pool. Gives me a name. So it's going to be testing warehouse. And then ask for performance level. So basically, how much do I want to spend per hour to have this thing scaling? And I can't go so big. And we'll talk about that in a second. I'm going to keep it really, really low and slow. It's going to be nice and cheap. And that's not the best idea for production, but it's fine for just playing around. So additional things, I want it blank. I don't want it a backup. I'm not creating anything. Collation's fine. Okay, so great. So that's off and creating. And then let's take a step back. Let's talk about what it actually is. So whether you're familiar with Azure SQL Data Warehouse or you've come across this Synapse thing and you're not sure what a SQL pool is, it's all the same thing, essentially. So it is an MPP solution. That is a massively parallel processing engine that is essentially do SQL, but massively in parallel. So it's a relational engine. It looks and feels like SQL Server. You can connect using Management Studio, and it's like, oh, hey, I'm just using SQL Server, great. Except anytime you run it, it distributes that query across a load of servers. They all do the querying in parallel, then it gives you your results back. Kind of like a Spark engine. So you have a brain. You have a driver in Spark parlance or a control node in SQL Pools parlance. So that is a single server that sits there. Whenever it's turned on, there's always at least one server that's sitting there getting queries, responding, talking to the workers, getting results back, all of that stuff. That's your control node. Sitting underneath that, you've got a variable number of compute nodes. So that's scaling that we're doing when we're saying on at 100, 500, 2000. That's saying how many compute nodes do I want provisioned, and I can change that number. However, apparently if I change it, that turns my server off, changes the number, turns my server back on again. So it's not like a super quick dynamic elastic scaling thing. It's a turn it off, wait a minute or two, it's back, but a different size. It's quite chunky, the scaling. Then sitting underneath that, currently there's 60 distributions. And they're essentially, as the picture shows, like little Azure SQL databases of their own. So if I get a 60,000 row table and I say, here you go, spread that out, then actually it'll put 1,000 rows on each one of those 60 tables in each one of the 60 databases. And then when I query it, each one of those compute nodes will say, well, I'm going to query those databases, I'm going to query those databases, I'm going to query those databases. So they all have isolated isolated storage that they're mapped to. Essentially, it's doing the same things that we do in Spark and big data kind of things of saying separation of storage and compute. You take your compute to the storage because moving data is expensive, run those queries, and then collate the results after. So that's kind of the architecture that we're talking about. So when I'm talking about 500 data warehouse units, I'm talking about one compute node. Now that is a bit of a change. So if you're around for the early days of SQL Data Warehouse, we had Gen 1, and then 100 data warehouse units was one compute node. So you can go, every 100 that you go up, you get an extra compute node, and they're fairly small little servers, and we're just saying, I just want lots of servers. So you can go up to 6,000 data warehouse units with Gen 1, and that means that you have one compute node, but each one of my 60 distributions, those kind of little data stores. So it's a one-to-one mapping. I can't go any more than that because I can't have more than one server querying the same data because we've got isolation of compute and storage together. So Gen 2 is that, well, actually, we're going to make these compute nodes way bigger, way chunkier. They are much beefier servers that are being used. But that means that we now have much bigger hops in terms of how we do it. So I can still go up to 60 of these ones, but each one is now 500 and going up. So 1,000 is 2 compute nodes, 1,500 is 3, 2,000 is 4. That's the kind of chunkiness that we're talking about. And when they did this, there's loads of people like me who had like a dev test scenario. And I didn't want to be paying 500 because that's actually a little bit expensive for something I'm doing some dev on. I wanted my nice, super cheap thing, like £4 an hour, 100 data warehouse units. And that was fine for me to test on, fine for me to play around with. Not that fast, but doesn't need to be. So they went, oh, okay, we'll give you that. But essentially, to get 100 data warehouse units, you're having a slice of a compute node. So 200 is a bit more of it. Basically, it's shared tenancy. So there's a compute node, a control node, compute node, that's like shared between a few different people, all trying to do little bits of dev and test. So those smaller ones, you can go 1, 2, 3, 400. They're not for production because you're sharing compute with someone else. And also, it's not that predictable. It's a little bit flaky occasionally. Not flaky, just performance is inconsistent because you're sharing a bit of kit with someone else. So yeah, be a little bit careful with those lower ones. Completely fine for dev and test. No data leakage, any of that kind of stuff. Just, it's not production grade doing that kind of thing. So the minimum you want to be on is 500 data warehouse units if you're doing things in production. Okay. So then getting data into it. So if we're using some traditional things like SSIS, BCP, those kind of things, they're going to try and squirt data at the data warehouse or the provisioned SQL pool. And it's going to hit that top node. It's going to hit the control node and not scale that effectively. What you want is for your various compute nodes, however many you have, to be reaching down and pulling data into your warehouse. Now, that means using things like Polybase. So that's using external tables. That's having to run a script saying, select star from my external table, CTAS it into another place. And that's the most efficient way to bring it in, because that means if I say I don't want 4 compute nodes, I want 10, I want 20, then it just scales linearly because I just get more threads that can read more bits of files at once from my lake. So I can just do more work at once in parallel, meaning my query goes faster. So you want to be using Polybase at some point to be able to pull data in effectively. Luckily, so Databricks, Data Factory, the tools that we're kind of commonly using in the lakey area, they can do this staging approach. So essentially I say, I want to take data, it's sitting in Databricks, I want to get it into my provisioned SQL pools, but actually I want it to be efficient, so use staging, and it'll dump the data from wherever it is into an intermediate blob store, and then Polybase it in automatically. And that's great, that's nice and efficient. Sometimes it makes you do that even if you're pulling data from a data lake. It'll do it into a blob and then into a thing, which is like an extra redundant step it doesn't need to do because you can Polybase over the lake. But even so, if you're trying to get data into SQL Data Warehouse, you want to be using these Polybase tables. So we'll try and start off with that. We'll just say, look, I've got data in my lake. Can I get my provisioned SQL pool that we've just created to get that data in, to make it accessible through my querying layer, and then I can do stuff with it. And I can save it, materialize it as a table, do whatever I want. So that's the plan. Let's see what we can do. Okay, right, cool. So that's now provisioned. So I've got my table there sitting around. I can go see some details on it. So I've got my endpoint. We'll use that in a bit. We can go and connect to that via Management Studio. But let's try and do something in the browser first. So there's one thing I noticed that I want to point out to you guys, actually. So when I created it, so because I've created this provisioned SQL pool, it creates a warehouse, basically a warehouse database. So there's a database created in my SQL server, which has all my stuff in ready to go. That is an empty SQL data warehouse currently. And you can see I've got a SQL on demand one that I created that's a logical database that I've created previously. And I can see both of them in my databases. That's great. But if I say I want to new SQL script. So I've got my choices here of which SQL pool I'm in. So am I using my on-demand SQL pool, which is the pay-as-you-go, always-on, responsive version, or am I paying my provisioned one, which is doing that whole clustering? I need to spin up a cluster, I need to do that stuff on it. Now, if I select SQL on demand, in my use database, I've only got master and ad hoc queries. If I switch back and use advancing warehouse, I've only got my advancing warehouse. I don't have access. They can't see each other, essentially. So we can test that. So on my warehouse, I can quickly say, well, let's just say, so let's use the master database and do select star from system databases. See what I can see. And there we go. Yeah, so you can see, I can see exactly what it brought back there. Master and warehouse is the things that this master database can see. If I switch around to the other one over there, I get the other side. So in terms of how we're building Azure databases currently, we build a logical SQL server, and then we attach databases or data warehouses to them. So kind of the way it's working is we've got a SQL pool. So the on-demand SQL pool is in one logical SQL server, and the provisioned SQL pool is in a different SQL server. So they're not aware of each other. So whether that's deliberate, whether that's preview, whether that's they'll never be able to see each other, no idea. There's probably a config thing we can do, but for now, they are two different beasts. But we can work with that. We can go from there. Okay, so let's quickly just show that we can connect to it. So I can go, I grabbed that address. Let's open Management Studio, make sure I can go in there and query it. And then it should act just like any other SQL data warehouse, right? So I think that was the same address. Yeah. Yep. And try and connect. Okay, so I can connect. That's good. See, I've got some databases over the side. See over here, I've got my advancing warehouse and I've got my various different bits. I run a query. And in here, I can do, so it is just SQL data warehouse. So select start from. So you've got a load of DMVs, a load of dynamic management views, which are the PDW versions, which exist within SQL Data Warehouse land, or Provisioned SQL Pool land, sorry. So I get a full history of all the different queries that have ever been run, what happened on it, who ran it, a load of thing about workload isolation, so I can see the importance, I can see the resource classes, all of that stuff. Again, that's just existing SQL Data Warehouse stuff, so I'm not going to go into that too much, but that works. I can see what's going on there. And I should, I think in monitoring, I think I get a similar thing. So I've got this SQL requests. This defaults to my SQL pool. I can go into Advancing Warehouse. And that, to me, because I've got those SQL request IDs, that looks like the same thing. So essentially, it's just showing you your history is exposed through the workspace, which is kind of nice being able to see what's going on. I'm curious, we'll pulse that at the end. And if I still get that history, that'll be great. I suspect that history is just reading straight from this table. And that table is flushed. Anytime I restart my server, and I scale my server, anytime I do anything with Provisioned SQL Pools, SQL Data Warehouse, it's going to dump all of that data. That is just temporary data, transient data that's there while I'm using it. So I suspect that's going to disappear. It might not, might be pleasantly surprised, but we can have a look. Okay, right, let's get some data in. So I want to go into my lake. I've got my lake in here. Let's get that up. So it's a really basic lake I just built last time, getting some Parquet in there. Okay, so that's a Parquet file. So I can do this new script, and I can just open it automatically, and that'll use the open row set stuff. Or I can create an external table, and that's what I want to do for the SQL Data Warehouse side, so I can make sure that works. I can do bulk load, and that's gonna, I believe that tries to build a data factory pipeline for me. So create external table. Okay, so it's which pool? I want to use my advancing warehouse. It's pick the database. What do I want to call? This is products, so let's call it DBO product. I haven't created a schema, so I'm sure I'll be upset. And let's get this to create a script for me. I want to see what it's trying to do. Oh, wow. Okay, that was quick. So what have I got? Okay, so normal stuff, creating a polybase table. You need some objects in there. So you need a master key and a credential, which I don't see, but I'm assuming it's using some kind of pass-through stuff. It's got to go file format, so just it's registering Parquet as a file format. You do need those SQL objects created. Get an external data source, so it's exposing my data source just as a new thing, and then it's creating my table for me. So it's gone through, it's worked out what all of the things are. So that, I'm assuming, has just read it from the Parquet schema. So Parquet has a schema built into it, so it's assumed it knows what the things are. It's getting that file, it's pulling it in. I'll see, that's going to a particular file currently. We'll see if we can get it to go from the folder. Let's just try and do this first. And then it's doing a select to prove that it works. Okay. So I'll be surprised if this works off the bat without any kind of credential. Normally you have an additional thing in here saying, my credential is, I'm pointed to a SQL object which is telling it how to connect. It doesn't have that in, but it might be using pass-through, so let's just try and run that. So it's running on Advancing Warehouse. It's connecting, starting, it's going off trying to do it. Okay, so there's a few bits we can do. So I've not even created a master key. So normally if you're storing credentials, then you need to create a database master key, and that can be an encryption key you choose, or you can just generate one. And then you store your credential, which has like your blob file key in there. And okay, well, that worked. Awesome. Okay, so obviously it must be using pass-through. So it's either connecting as Synapse, using the Synapse managed service identity, or connecting as me, as my user, and going through and doing it. Either way, it's managed to do it, so it's connected to that file format. It's understood as Parquet, it's connected to that location, and it's gone back and it done queried some Parquet for me. So I should actually, if I go over to my workspace over here, if I hit a quick refresh, should be able to see external tables. Okay, I've got a product. And there we go, okay. So that's registered it as a good object. I can have a play with that. I can switch over. I should be able to see that over here. I think I should call it DBO products. No, I didn't. Called it something else. Let's find out what I called it. So external tables. Right. Surprise, surprise. Okay. Okay. So external file access due to internal error. Java exception on the HTTPS bridge. So the HTTPS bridge is that's the Hadoop file system bridge. So that's the lake reader that Polybase is trying to use. So Polybase failed essentially because it doesn't know how to connect to that. And that I'd assume would be because the credential's missing, because it doesn't know what the credential is. So that's interesting. So why does that work and that doesn't work? So let's just, if we create a new script, and just say, we'll do the same thing, using Advancing Warehouse, select that, go, select my products. Yeah, so that works, that's happy. So it works if I'm in the Synapse workspace, it doesn't work through Management Studio. Let's try and find out why. Okay, so I can go to my history. So I've got my on-demand history, I've got my Advantage Warehouse history, see they failed. That could be why, actually. Okay, so you can see in my history, I've got my different things. I can see in that one, I was doing a select 100 star. In that one, I was doing the same thing. One worked, one didn't. No real difference except for a top 100. But that one was trying to use SQL admin user. So because that was using a SQL login, then SQL login isn't aware of any kind of Active Directory pass-through kind of stuff. So I'd assume that's trying to act as, like SQL Data Warehouse currently does, as it is, it's not aware of any pass-through stuff that Synapse would be using. So that would be interesting to say, is that just saying, I know who's actually connecting, therefore I'm going to see if you've got access, because that is a SQL user that doesn't have access. Or whether it is a proper difference from actually connecting through the workspace. So I can try, I've not set it up, but I could try and connect through Active Directory to my SQL server, to the warehouse, via SSMS and see if that passes through. I'll give that another test at some point. What can we do? We can create the objects that we're missing. So, okay, I can create a master key. And then I need to go and work out how I create a database credential. That's been a while. Okay, database credential. Just grab that. Because I think what we can do, there we go. We can do it through here. So if we do that, so I want to create a database credential. I'm going to call this my, what we're talking to. We're talking to my lake, right? So I want it to go to this same thing. Actually, I can go and create these things in here. Let's go over here, put it in there, create that thing. I'm going to call it root of advancing ADLS so it knows where it is. And in this case, I think we'll just make that We can try and do it with the blob key, actually, given it is just on AWS Gen 2. So if I'm doing that for one of the things, we're not doing it as a shared access signature. So we could try it and just see if it works with that lake as it is. So it's going to be in that one. Steal a key. I'm going to change all these keys after I've shown you all of this, because otherwise people are going to hack me. Okay. Okay, so can I do that? See if that works. Yep, so like that. And then we can say credential equals that. So all we're doing is saying create an external data source rather than passing it through and doing it based on whoever's using it. I want you to connect using this key. Now that key is like full admin access to my entire lake. So that's normally not necessarily the way you want to do it. I'm trying to test it, see how this is working. So see if that's doing. Go in that. So I should be able to do that. That's going to tell me off because that already exists. So just do it as whatever. Doesn't really matter as long as it's something new. So if I run that, is that going to be happy? Okay, so that's created a new external data source. I can then, if I drop external table, get rid of that one. And then I can create it again, except this time I'm going to point it at my other data source. So my new data source was this one. And then hopefully this should just prove that it's working using some local pass-throughs if I'm using a Synapse workspace. But I can still do things the old school way. Let's see. Okay, create external table, run that. Okay, seemed happy. Proof is in pudding. Okay, so that worked, but then that worked originally anyway. So let's just hop back over here, if I can run this now. Okay, cool. Okay, so that's good. So polybase and all that kind of stuff looked like it works in the same way that it used to. They haven't really changed that, except there's now the ability to do it using pass-through with a logged-in user if we're using it through the Synapse workspace. Okay, good. So then what we should be able to do is the old, okay, let's create table, give it a name. So let's call this dim product. And then that'll have some settings. There. So that's known as a CTAS. So my create table as select. Because we're in Provisioned SQL Pools, we need two things. We need a distribution and we need a index. Now defaults are round robin. Call it round robin and clustered. It's clustered. Store index. Can't remember. I'll have to check that. So let's see. Put that up. Create table select. It's been a while. Distribution options. Okay, so separate words. Let's do that. Okay, so there we go. So I'm saying create it as round robin. So that means across all those 60 distributions. So I'm going to take a copy of this data. This data is currently held as a single Parquet file sitting in my lake. I'm saying read all of it in, bring it into my Provisioned SQL pool, then spread it out across those 60 distributions, putting some records on each one of those databases. Because I'm saying round robin, that just says make it as even as possible. Try and spread that data out in a nice, even way. I could say hash, and say actually I want to hash around one of the columns. That's going to say every repeated row that's got the same value is going to live in the same distribution. Now that is awesome for doing performance tuning and making sure things are aligned properly and all that. Comes with great ability to skew your data. So if you've got your data really nicely spread across, and then most of your data sits on one of those databases, you've lost all of your parallelism. You're paying for a big expensive cluster and you're not using most of it. So hash is really good, but you need to know what you're doing. The other one is called replicate. And that's saying basically put a copy of this table on each one of my, not my distributions, it's available for each one of my compute nodes. So if I've got 4 compute nodes, whenever I query it, it'll copy it across. So I've got 4 copies of that data. That just means that I don't need to worry about querying things and joining it across distributions and doing lots of data movement. Just everything already has a copy of it. So that's for smaller tables when I want to be able to actually just get some efficiencies. Exactly the same if you're in Spark and you do a broadcast join. Broadcast join just says, take that data and just copy it to each of my workers because I don't want to have to do data movement and shuffles. Exactly the same concept, same thing. So I should be able to do that. So dim product, you're not going to create it. So just get everything from there completely successfully. So if I refresh this, should have that in. There we go, dim product. Great. I can now do select start from. Here we go, dim product. Okay, so that works happily. And this enables me to do some interesting things. So I can do, I can join different things together. So dim product is my materialized, that's a hard copy, it's not linked to anything in the lake, that's just inside my provisioned SQL pool. DBO product is going back and querying the lake each time. Each time I hit go on that select, so I've got that original select. So I've got this one is query the lake, and I've got this one is query my internal storage, basically. But what I can do a union. So I can do select count star from, yes, from there. Let's do that as a subquery. Let's do that as, so I can run queries like that. That's saying, actually, just take everything together, join them together, treat them as the same thing. Now that one that's in my lake, I could be streaming to that. I could have a constant influx of data. That could be a file, that a CSV file people just drop occasionally and kind of replace. So that can have like fairly loose production things. I can have people playing around with it, doing what they want. Whereas in this one, I can have my proper official one. So I can have a blended data architecture. In this case, I've not got a more count because I said union all. I said union, so I've got rid of the duplicates. Union all, I should see double that number. So there we go. So that's quite nice. So now from my SQL Data Warehouse, from my provisioned SQL pool, I can see data in the lake and query it. I can see data that I've got locally and query it. I can join them both together. I can work with them. That's quite nice. And I guess I manage everything through Synapse. So over setting in my configuration, if I want to go to that, yeah. So I want to turn it off. So I don't want to be spending money because every hour that is turned on, it's costing me money. And I can scale it. So I can actually say, well, that 100 data warehouse units, that's okay, but it's not very fast. You can go up to 500, and then that's kind of like all my little chunks of compute nodes. Then after that, it scales in units of 500, because that's whole compute nodes. So I can scale it from there. That'll, again, kill any queries, wait for it to scale, turn it back on again. So let's actually, if I pause that now, okay, so check there's no active queries, going off pausing that. So everything inside there will be unavailable now I've paused it. So if I went and tried to write a SQL script and I wanted to query from that database, I wouldn't be able to see it. I'm assuming as soon as that's done, I won't be able to see any of my my history. So in my SQL requests, let's go back to SQL Data, I can see 2 data warehouses. So I don't get any results in here. So even though a minute ago I could go in here and see all of my different exec requests, I could see the history of how people are using my server, I now can't see anything because it's the queries down, the cluster's down. So it's only available while you got the cluster turned on, which is okay. And then can I see that that's paused? I can currently still open it, but that doesn't work. Cannot connect when database is paused, which is it is a message you get very used to if you're using SQL Data Warehouse and you turn it off a lot. Okay. So it looks like Synapse Analytics is essentially the provisioned SQL pools is exactly the same as it currently is. It's got some nuance as to whether you're accessing it from within the Synapse workspace or within Management Studio, depending on whether you're a SQL user or not. It's going to work differently. It doesn't have things like Active Directory pass-through. If you're not using Active Directory, makes a lot of sense. But otherwise, it is in there and it just seems to work. So it's fairly straightforward. It doesn't seem to be too different to how we've seen it before. Okay, so that was a nice little starter. We've had a play. We can get in there. We can go and work with it, which is good. Main thing is going to be remembering to turn it off. because it is just an ongoing cost. When you press that button to turn it on, it's going to start charging you for that full hour. Even if you scale it up and down within an hour, it's going to charge you for that full hour the highest volume you had it in. So even if you put it in up for 5 minutes, turn it right back down again, that full hour is charged at the highest cost. And it doesn't have things like auto terminate. It doesn't have auto scale. You can't say, well, if you're really quiet, just scale back down again. It's a decide how big you want it, turn it on, work with it at that size. But otherwise, it does seem fully plumbed in, so we can query it through the root, we can build scripts, we can build those external tables. All seems pretty standard, and yeah, all seems pretty good. So, interesting as to how big does your data need to be before you start using it? Rough rule of thumb, kind of, as long as we're talking terabytes, it's probably good. Is it worth spinning up if you've only got 500 meg of data? Megadata, no. 500 gig of data, maybe you'd be better off using SQL On Demand. Depends on how often you queried it and how many queries you ran, because SQL On Demand is paid by throughput, by how many terabytes you read. And there'll be this kind of balancing act of at some point you'll use SQL On Demand enough that Provisioned SQL Pools becomes cheaper. So it's how much are you going to use it? Are you going to use it in sporadic bursts, and you know that burst is coming, in which case provisioning a pool might save you a lot of money. So lots of different things. Be interesting to see how it develops and how it plumbs in. Again, haven't tried orchestration, haven't seen how dynamically we can build these things. And I want to dig more into, say, can it query those on-demand tables? Because it really should be able to. But yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe if you like the video, and check out some of the other videos that we've had before. And otherwise, we'll catch you next time.